Book 15. Meanwhile, an inquiry. Who could sustain the awesome burden of power and come to Romulus's throne as a worthy successor? The excellent man, marked out by prescient rumor for kingship, was Numa, a capable thinker who wasn't content with having researched the religious rites of the Sabines. His restless, ambitious mind led him on to explore the mysteries of nature itself. This passionate interest made him forsake his birthplace at Curies, and find his way to the city of Croton, whose walls were erected close to where Hercules, long in the past, had stayed as a guest. On arrival, Numa inquired who had founded a new Greek town on Italian soil, and received this answer from one of the elders, born and bred in the place, and thus well versed in its history. The story goes that when Hercules left the ocean, with Gerion's cattle from Spain as his prize, he was safely brought to the coast of Licinium. There, while his herd was grazing the soft green pasture, he entered great Croton's house to receive a hospitable welcome, and so was able to rest at the end of his arduous labor. He said to his host as he took his leave, "One day in the future this place will be home to a city." That promise was faithfully kept. In Argos, there once was a man called Myscelus, son of Alamon. No one in his generation was better esteemed by the gods. One night as he lay asleep, the club-bearer came to his bedside, and, leaning over him, said, "Rise, leave the home of your fathers. Go and travel afar to the stony stream of the Aesir. Many terrible things will ensue if you fail to obey me." Hercules then departed, and Myscelus woke. He instantly rose from his bed and silently brooded over the dream he had just been sent. A long debate took place in his mind. A god was bidding him go, but the laws of his country forbade it, and death was prescribed for a person who wished to abandon his homeland. After the sun had hidden his shining head in the ocean, and darkest night was crowned once more by the stars in the heavens, the god appeared in a second dream and repeated his order, with threats of further disaster and worse if he wasn't obeyed. So Myscelus, deeply frightened, made ready to move his ancestral shrine to a new abode, but a rumor went round, and the townsfolk put him on trial for contempt of the law. When the case against him was fully made and the charge was proved without a requirement to call any witness, the poor defendant, in suppliant rags, uplifted his hands and his face to the sky and appealed to Hercules. "Hero whose 12 great labors secured your title to heaven, help me, I pray you now. My crime was prompted by you." Now, the custom in ancient times was for jurors to vote for a verdict with black and white pebbles, black for conviction and white for acquittal. This procedure was followed at Myscelus's trial, when every one of the pebbles cast in the urn was black for conviction. But after the pot was turned and the votes fell out to be counted, all of the pebbles were found to have changed from black to white. Thus Hercules' intervention ensured that the son of Alamon was duly acquitted. Myscelus thanked the god for his goodness, and then, with the wind behind him, he sailed across the Ionian Sea. His route took him past Neritum, the Salentine city, Spartan Tarentum, the Bay of Cyrus, Sybaris, Crimacy, Iapix's country too, and finally, while he was skirting the coastline, he found his destiny close to the mouth of the Aesir. Not far from there was a mound where Croton's hallowed remains lay buried in the earth, and on that site, as the god had commanded, Myscelus founded a town called after the man who was buried there. That, according to ancient tradition, explains this city's beginnings and how it came to be built on Italian soil. Here in Croton there lived a man who was born on Samos. He'd fled from the island because he detested the tyrants who ruled there, and gone into voluntary exile. His mind came close to the gods, remote as they are in the heavens above. What nature debarred to human vision he saw with the eyes of the spirit within him. All that this insight, backed by untiring effort, discovered, he wanted to share with others. His audiences listened in wondering silence while he explained how the universe first began, discoursed at length upon causes, defined what nature and God were, showed how the snow was formed and what was the source of the lightning, whether the winds or Jupiter thundered from clouds in collision, the reason for earthquakes, the laws which govern the stars in their courses, and all the secrets of nature. This sage was the first to condemn the consumption of animal food, and the first to express such a doctrine, informed as it was, but not given credit, in words such as these. Mortals, do not defile your bodies with sinful eating. You have the crops to sustain you, the fruit which forces the branches to bend down under its weight, the grapes that swell on the vine, scented herbs and vegetables that fire can soften. Milk's sweet flow cannot fail you, nor honey fragrant with thyme. The earth supplies her riches and nourishing food in lavish abundance. She offers you feasts that demand no slaughter or bloodshed. Meat assuages the hunger of animals, not every species, since horses, cattle, and sheep all happily flourish on grass. Only the beasts whose natural instincts are savage and untamed. Angry lions, Armenian tigers, or bears and wolves delight in the taste of blood. What a heinous crime is committed when guts disappear inside a fellow creature's intestines, when greedy bodies grow fat on the flesh of the bodies they've eaten, and one living thing depends for its life on the death of its neighbor. Here is this wondrous wealth which the earth, the kindest of mothers, produces, and yet you are happy to bite cruel wounds in your victims, chomping them up with your teeth in the grisly style of a cyclops. You have no way of relieving the hunger pangs of your greedy, uncivilized bellies except by destroying the life of another. That famous age to which we have given the title of golden was blessed in the fruit of the trees and the plants produced by the earth. Man never polluted his lips with blood. The birds could safely fly on their way through the air. The hare never feared to cross over a field, and the fish didn't rise to the bait to be caught on a hook. In a world of peace, no traps or snares were there to alarm. But someone, whoever he was, must have envied the lions their food and set a fatal example by filling his greedy stomach with meat. He opened the gate to crime. The killing of beasts might first explain the staining of iron with steaming blood, and that would have been enough. We may kill any animal seeking to kill ourselves, we admit, without any scruple of conscience. But while we may kill it, we don't have to make it a course in a banquet. The rot continued. The sow, it is commonly thought, was the first to be picked as a victim for sacrifice. Why? Because she'd uprooted the planted seeds with her snout and interfered with the harvest. The goat, who had nibbled away at a vine, was led to the altar of Bacchus, there to be offered up to the god he'd offended. These two were punished for damage they'd caused. But how have the sheep done wrong, those peaceful grazers intended by nature to help us, whose udders are filled with delicious milk, whose fleeces provide us with soft warm clothes, and who serve us better by living than dying? What have the oxen done, those totally guileless creatures, those simple, innocuous beasts who were born to a life of labor? How could a man have the heart to remove the yoke of the plow from his faithful worker, and almost at once to make him a victim, wielding his axe on that toil-worn neck, whose strength had allowed him to break and renew the soil each year that had yielded a harvest? A man so ungrateful hardly deserves the crops he is reaping. But not content with such wicked behavior, men choose to involve the gods themselves in their guilt. They reckon the powers of heaven are filled with delight when a loyal, hard-working bullock is slaughtered. A victim unblemished and perfectly formed, its beauty is its downfall. adorned with ribbons and gold on its horns, is set by the altar. It listens to prayers which it can't understand and can feel the sprinkling between the horns of its forehead, or barley it helped to produce. Its throat is cut, and the blood runs onto the knife, whose reflection the animal may have already seen in the lustral water. The priests move quickly to snatch and inspect the lungs from the throbbing breast of the victim in order to scan the purpose divine. And then, O race of mortals, so great is man's lust for prohibited food, you dare to gorge on your victim's flesh. Now stop, I implore you, and mark my words. When you cram your mouths with the members of slaughtered oxen, remember you're eating your own farm workers. Now since a god is moving my lips, I shall duly obey the god that inspires me. I'll vent the spirit of Delphi within me. Unveil the heavens, unlock the decrees of the mind sublime. I'll utter great mysteries, never explored by our father's intelligence. Mysteries long concealed in the dark. My will is to traverse the stars on high, to abandon this clogging abode on earth, to ride the clouds and to stand on the shoulders of mighty Atlas. Gaze down from afar on men who are helplessly straying at random, empty of reason, trembling and troubled by fear of their ending, and so to embolden their hearts by unrolling the scroll of fate. Oh, why does the human race, paralyzed by the terror of chill death, why does it fear the Styx in its darkness, the meaningless names that are bandied by poets, the bogies of life in imaginary worlds? Our bodies, you know, can suffer no further ills, whether flames on the funeral pyre or rotting time in the grave has destroyed them. Our souls, however, are free from death. They simply depart from their former homes and continue their lives in new habitations. I myself, I recall, at the time of the Trojan War, was called Euphorbus, Panthous's son, and I once was wounded close to the heart by the powerful spear of King Menelaus. Not long ago, in the temple of Juno at Argos, I noticed a shield and knew that I once had borne it myself on my left arm. All is subject to change and nothing to death. The spirit in each of us wanders from place to place. It enters whatever body it pleases, crossing over from beast to man and back again to a beast. It never perishes wholly. As pliable wax is easily stamped with a new impression, and never remains as it was nor preserves one single shape, but still is the self-same wax. So I say that our souls are always the same, though they move from home to home in different bodies. Therefore, hark to my voice. Let love and family, duty never be overpowered by the lusts of the belly. Beware the impious slaughter which dispossesses the soul of a kinsman, and never be tempted to feed your blood with the blood of another. My vessel is launched on the boundless main, and my sails are spread to the wind. In the whole of the world there is nothing that stays unchanged. All is in flux. Any shape that is formed is constantly shifting. Time itself flows steadily by in perpetual motion. Think of a river. No river can ever arrest its current, nor can the fleeting hour. But as water is forced downstream by the water behind it, and presses no less on the water ahead, so time is in constant flight and pursuit continually new. The present turns into the past, and the future replaces the present. Every moment that passes is new and eternally changing. You see how the night has measured its course moves onto the day. The night that has measured its course moves onto the day, and the radiant beams of the sun then follow the blackness of night. The sky has a different color when weary creatures are sleeping at dead of night, and later when Lucifer brightly emerges out of the sea on his pearl-white steed. Then again when Aurora, the herald of dawn, emblazons the world for surrender to Phoebus. The sun's round shield, when it's lifted up from below the horizon, is red in the morning, and red once more when it sinks to its rest. It is brilliant white at its zenith, for then the ether is purer, and earth's contagion is farthest removed. The moon is constantly changing in size and shape. If waxing, she's always smaller today than she will be tomorrow, and always larger when waning. Again, you can see that the year has 4 new forms in succession. Her phases copy the total course of our human lives. In early springtime, the year is tender and milky, resembling the age of our childhood. The grass is fresh and swelling to fullness, but wanting in firmness and strength. The farmer delights in its promise. Everything then is in bloom, and the nurturing fields are a riot of bright-colored flowers, though the leaves on the trees still lack any vigor. When spring is over, a sturdier year moves on into summer, and now is a strong young man. No season or time of life is more hardy or fertile, no age when the heat is burning more fiercely. Then follows the autumn, when youth's excitements and passions are over, ripe and mellow, the bridge which leads from youth to old age, when the climate is milder and streaks of gray appear on the temples. Finally winter arrives, which totters along like an old man, shivering, bald as a coot, or white if he has any hair left. Our bodies also are constantly changing and never at rest. What we were once and we are today, shall not be tomorrow. Time was, we were hidden away in the dark of our mother's wombs, no more than seeds and the early hopes of a human being. Then nature conspired with a midwife's art in a firm refusal to let us be strangled inside our mother's distended bellies, and thrust us out of the house to survive in the open air. So thus brought forth to the light, we helplessly lay in our cradles. But soon we were starting to move like animals crawling on all fours. Little by little, with wobbly knees, we shakily rose to our feet and supported our frames with some firm prop to hold on to. After that, we are strong and swift, and we traverse the span of our active lives till we've served the time in between and can follow the downward path of declining years like the setting sun, when the strength of our earlier years is undermined and demolished. Milo the wrestler weeps when he's old and examines the arms which once had the power of Hercules' limbs and were bulging with muscles, but now hang down by his sides, limp, flaccid, and useless. Helen weeps too when she looks in her mirror to see her old woman's wrinkles and wonders how she came to be twice abducted. Time, the universal devourer, and spiteful decay, there is nothing you cannot destroy. You close your envenomed jaws and little by little consume all things in a lingering death. This law of impermanence also applies to what we call elements. Pay attention and I shall explain the changes they pass through. The world eternal contains 4 bodies which generate matter. 2 of them, earth and water, are heavy and gravitate downwards. The other 2, air and fire, which is even purer, are weightless and tend to make their way up, if nothing is pressing them down. Although these elements occupy different positions in space, they form the source and the end of all matter. When earth breaks up, it is rarefied into water. The moisture is thinned till further, and it changes to wind and to air, which in time, relieved of its weight, and now as thin as can be, darts up to the fire in the ether. The process is then unraveled and all the elements change back. Fire is thickened and crosses again into denser air. Air forms into water, and water's compressed into firm, hard earth. Nothing retains its original form, but nature, the goddess of all renewal, keeps altering one shape into another. Nothing at all in the world can perish. You have to believe me. Things merely vary and change their appearance. What we call birth is merely becoming a different entity. What we call death is ceasing to be the same. Though the parts may possibly shift their position from here to there, the wholeness in nature is constant. I, for one, would believe that nothing continues the same for long. The Golden Age eventually changed to the Iron, and places also have often been subject to transformation. I've seen myself what was once the solidest stretch of earth replaced by water and land formations supplanting the ocean. Shells can be seen on the ground some distance away from a shore, and ancient anchors have been discovered on mountain summits. Plains have been turned into valleys by rushing torrents in full spate, Flooding can likewise flatten a mountain to level ground. Marshes can dry into sand, and arid deserts be watered to form great pools. New springs can gush at the bidding of nature, while others will trickle to nothing. When earthquakes cause an upheaval, rivers have gushed from the ground or else dried up and subsided. So when a chasm swallows the Lycus up, it emerges again some distance away, reborn from a different mouth. So also a river which starts in Arcadia glides on its way underground and appears once more as the grand Ericenis in Argos. They say that the Myscelus was so ashamed of its source and its earlier banks that today it flows elsewhere as the river Caicus. In Sicily's hills, Amenonis may now be rolling the sand downstream. If its source runs dry, the bed will be parched and empty. Once you could drink the water which flows in the river Anigris, but now it is foul, since the centaurs used it to wash the wounds inflicted by club-bearing Hercules' arrows, unless the stories of poets are worth no credence at all. We also know that the water of Hypanis' stream is fresh and drinkable close to its source in the Scythian mountains, but then grows brackish and nasty. Antissa, Pharos, and Tyre, that famous Phoenician city, were once surrounded by waves, but none is an island today. In the time of its early inhabitants, Lusus was part of the mainland, where it now is ringed by the sea. They also say that Messana was joined to Italian soil, till the sea abolished the common boundary, and formed the strait which divides the isle from the mainland. The Achaean cities of Burus and Helice are to be found if you look for them under water. The sailors will still point out the toppled buildings and walls beneath the floods that submerged them. Close to Troezen, the kingdom of Pythias, a lofty and treeless bulge has appeared in the form of a mound, where once the plain was completely level. The story's a frightening one to relate. The winds had been trapped inside their underground cave and were trying to breathe their furious violence out, but had struggled in vain to find any outlet. There wasn't a crack in the whole of their prison through which their blasts could have possibly traveled. Their puffing and blowing caused the ceiling of earth to stretch and to swell like a bladder or goatskin when they are inflated. The ground stayed swollen and hardened in time to the shape of the hill which now towers over Methone. Though many more instances come to mind that I've found or have heard of, I'll only mention a few. Even water both causes and also is subject to change. The spring at the temple of horn-crowned Ammon is cold at noon, but agreeably warm at sunrise and sunset. They say that at Jupiter's shrine in Dodona, the torches are kindled by bringing them up to the spring when the moon has shrunk to its smallest. The Sicanes live by a river whose water petrifies entrails when people have drunk it and turns whatever it touches to marble. Crathis and Sybaris, two adjoining rivers in these parts, cause one's hair to be tinted in colors of gold and amber. And more astonishing still, there are waters with power to change not only our bodies, but even our minds. You must have heard of Salmacis' pool, whose waves emasculate men who have bathed there. The Ethiopian lake, where anyone drinking the water either goes mad or passes out in a stupefied coma. Whoever relieves his thirst at the spring in Arcadian Clitor becomes an abstainer, avoids all wine, and enjoys pure water. That spring may possess a power which stops wine's heating effect, or perhaps, as the locals explain, when the prophet Melampus had used his herbs with a spell to cure the frenzied daughters of Proetus of madness, he threw the dregs of his medicines into the water, and so the detestation of wine survived in the spring. Lyncestus's river produces a different effect on its drinkers. Even a moderate sip will cause them to stagger around as if they'd imbibed neat wine. There's also a place in Arcadia, known as Phenios once, where the water is dangerously suspect. Drink it during the day, but never at night when it's harmful. Such are the new and various powers which rivers and lakes can acquire. Long ages ago, Ortygia floated in sea, but today she sits firm. The Argonauts feared the Symplegades, chasing rocks that were splashed by the spray from the waves in the shock of collision. The same rocks now stand still, and the winds are powerless to shift them. Take the sulfurous furnaces raging in Etna's volcano. The fire won't always be active, and was not so in the past. Volcanoes as possible explanations support this statement. One is that the earth is an animate creature with breathing holes through which she discharges flame in a number of different places. This means that, whenever she quakes, she is able to alter her breathing channels and open new craters while rendering others inactive. Another theory: craters confine light winds in their depths. Suppose that these winds toss rocks against rocks, material holding the seeds of flame, and it's that which generates fire by friction. The craters will then grow cold as soon as the winds have abated. Or else the fire may be caused by bitumen quickly igniting, or yellow sulfur which burns in wispy spirals of smoke. But of course, when the earth no longer supplies any food or richness to nourish the flames, as time has exhausted all her resources, and when devouring nature is thus deprived of the fuel it needs, unable to bear starvation, she'll starve her volcanoes. The story goes that the men in Hyperborean Palani frequently grow light feathers which cover the whole of their bodies, after they've bathed 9 times in the waters of Lake Tritonus. I cannot believe it myself, but the Scythian witches are also reported to put on feathers by sprinkling themselves with their poisons. But if one can speak of believing facts that are fully established, you see that bodies which time or heat has rotted to liquid are turned into tiny animals. Dig me a ditch and then bury a sacrificed bull. Experience shows that bees will be born all over the moldering carcass. The bees will follow the parents they sprung from busily cropping the flowers in the fields they inhabit, never shirking their task, as they always have plenty to work for. A warhorse buried in soil will become the source of a hornet, or if you remove the branching claws of a crab on the seashore and bury the rest in earth, a scorpion will shortly emerge from the part you have carefully covered and threaten your feet with its hooked tail. Farmers have often observed the larvae weaving the threads of their white cocoons on the leaves of the trees and finally changing into the form of a butterfly, such as we see on a tombstone. Mud has seeds which produce green frogs. They are legless to start with, but soon they acquire the limbs which allow them to swim, and to take great leaps with hind legs longer than those they're endowed with in front. When a bear reproduces, she doesn't give birth to a full-formed cub, but a half-living lump of flesh, which she carefully licks into shape and eventually molds to the kind of form she exhibits herself. You see how the larvae, created by bees who make honey inside the hexagonal cells of the comb, are memberless bodies at birth, and only later assume the feet and the wings for their business. The bird of Juno, the peacock who carries the stars in her tail, the eagle that bears Jove's bolts, and the doves of beautiful Venus, the whole of the avian family, who would suppose they could grow from the yolk of an egg if one didn't know for a fact that they did? When a human backbone has decomposed in a well-sealed tomb, some think that the spinal marrow is then transformed to a snake. All these creatures can trace their beginnings to alien forms. There's one, however, which seeds and produces itself, the bird the Assyrians call the phoenix. He doesn't depend on the grass or the grain, but lives on teardrops of incense and juice of amomum. Once his allotted span, 500 years, is completed, he promptly uses his talons and unsoiled beak to construct a nest in the branches high at the top of a quivering palm tree. As soon as this nest has been lined with spikes of the mildest nard, with grated cinnamon, red gold myrrh, and cassia bark, he rests his body upon them and ends his life in their fragrance. And so, they say, from out of his father's body, a baby phoenix is born, which is due to live for the next 5 centuries. When time has given him strength and he's able to carry a load, removing the weight of the nest from the heights of the palm tree's branches, he faithfully carries his cradle, the grave of his father before him, into the breezes, and when he arrives at the sun god's city, he lays it in front of the sacred doors of Hyperion's temple. But if these curious facts and stories inspire us with wonder, we may be surprised by the change of sex when the female hyena, who once was served by a male, appears to have grown male organs. Chameleons, too, which obtain their food from the winds and the air, at once take on the color of anything else they are touching. Vanquished India gave to Bacchus, the god of the grapevine, all of her lynxes, whose urine, they say, is converted to pebbles and hardens in contact with air. The same with coral, a soft plant underwater which hardens at once when exposed to the air. The day will come to an end, and Phoebus will plunge his panting steeds in the ocean deep before I complete my recital of change to new forms. We see times change and civilizations rise and fall. Yes, Troy was great in her riches and people. For 10 long years she was able to spend the blood of so many sons in her cause. But now she is humbled, and all she can show for her glorious wealth is ancestral barrows and ancient ruins. Sparta was highly renowned, and so was powerful Mycenae. So flourished the cities of Cecrops at Athens and Theban Amphion. Sparta is bare, flat earth, and the towers of Mycenae were toppled. Nothing remains of Oedipus's Thebes or Pandion's Athens except for their names. And now word goes that Dardanian Rome is rising. Close to the river that's born in the Apennines, Tiber, foundations are being laid of a mighty city and empire. Rome is changing her shape as she grows. Sometime in the future she'll form the head of the boundless world. So prophets, they tell us, and soothsaying oracles loudly proclaim. When Troy was collapsing, Helenus, son of Priam, declared to the weeping Aeneas, so far as I can recall, when the hero despaired of his safety, "Son of a goddess, you know my mind has the power of clairvoyance. Troy shall not fall entirely if you are alive and in safety. Fire and sword shall give way before you. You'll go on your mission, bearing with you the gods that you've snatched from the flames, until you come to a strange new land which is kinder to you and to Troy than the country you left. I can see a city of Phrygian grandsons, greater than any that is, or has been, or shall rise hereafter. Other leaders over the centuries will render her powerful, but one man born of Aeolus's blood will make her the mistress of all the world. When the earth has enjoyed his presence, the realms of the sky will enjoy him too. He is finally destined for heaven." So I remember that Helenus said to the pious Aeneas, bearing his household gods, "I rejoice that the walls of my kinsmen are rising so fast, that the Greeks won a war for the good of the Trojans. But not to stray too far from the track, have my horses forgotten to run to their goal? The sky and all that exists beneath it can change its form, and so can the earth with all it contains. We, too, are part of the world and are more than physical bodies. We also possess winged souls. We are able to make our abodes inside wild beasts and to hide away in the hearts of the cattle. The creatures we see may well embody the souls of our parents or brothers or people to whom we've been bonded, of human beings at least. So let us allow them their safety and proper respect, and refrain from gorging on feasts of our own flesh and blood like Thyestes. How evil a habit is formed, what an impious shedding of human blood is contrived, when the throat of a calf is slit with a knife and the ears of the butcher are deaf to its mother's pitiful lowing. How could anyone slaughter a goat as it cries in distress like a baby, or eat a bird that he's fed with his own hand? Downright murder, I'd venture to call it. And where does it all lead on to? The ox should remain at his plow and blame old age for his death. Let the sheep provide our defense against the blast of the north wind. Goats should continue to offer their swollen udders for milking. All of these nets and traps and snares and crafty devices, have done with them. Cease to deceive the birds with your treacherous limed twigs, duping the deer by stringing feathers on ropes to unnerve them, luring the fish with bait on the hidden hooks of your lines. If an animal harms you, destroy it, but do no more than destroy it. Cleave to a diet that sheds no blood and is kind to all creatures. Such, and much else besides, was the learning they say that Numa imbibed before he returned to his native land and accepted the invitation to guide and govern the Latian people. Blessed with a nymph for his wife and the Muses to show him the way, he instructed the Romans in priestly rites and converted a nation practiced in brutal war to follow the arts of peace. When old King Numa had ended his life, the Senate and people and women of Latium bemoaned his death. His wife Egeria left the city to hide in the woods of the Aracene Valley, and there with her wailing dirges disturbed the worship of Tauric Diana. The nymphs of the forest and neighboring lake repeatedly warned her to stop, and tried to console her with words of comfort. Often Theseus's heroic son would discover her weeping, and say, "Put an end to your tears. You aren't alone in your sad misfortune. Consider the trials of others, and then you will find your own more easy to bear. Let me tell you a story to lighten your grief. I wish it were not my own, but it may prove helpful. You must have heard of Hippolytus, sent to his death by a wicked stepmother's cruel deceit and his father Theseus's credulity. What I am going to say will surprise you and cannot be proved, but I am Hippolytus. Once Pasiphae's daughter Phaedra failed to make me betray my father by sharing her bed, and then denounced me for wanting what she herself had been guilty of wanting. Perhaps she feared I would give her away, or was angry because I rejected her love. At any rate, I was convicted. Although I had done no wrong, my father expelled me from Athens and laid a deadly curse on my head as I went into exile. My chariot and horses were making for Pythias' city of Troezen, and soon I was driving along the coast of the Isthmus of Corinth, when half of the sea rose up. A gargantuan tidal wave, as tall as a mountain, appeared to swell in a monstrous crescent, bellowing loudly, and then to divide at its highest point. At once, as the waves burst open, a bull sprang out of the ocean, a bull with menacing horns, breast high in the yielding air, spouting masses of sea from his gaping mouth and his nostrils. My friends were terrified. I was absorbed in the prospect of exile and stayed unafraid, when my horses suddenly bolted and wheeled across the shore to the sea, long ears pricked up in their panic. Wild with fear of the bull, they were going to hurtle my chariot onto the towering rocks. I vainly struggled to manage the foam-flecked bridles. I leaned right back on my heels and pulled on the supple reins as hard as I could. The furious horses would still have been under control if one of the wheels, at the very point where it turned on the axle, had not crashed into a tree stump. Crack, and the wheel was broken to pieces. My body was flung from the chariot, twined in the reins, and you might have observed my living flesh being trailed on the ground, my sinews caught on the tree stump, some of my limbs being dragged along, with others obstructed and left behind, as my bones were noisily snapped and splintered. My weary spirit at last gave out, and there wasn't a part of my body which could have been known as mine. It was all one wound. Now can you, Egeria, dare you compare your misfortune with mine? I then had to visit the kingdom of darkness, to bathe my mangled body in Phlegethon's waters. Only the healing gifts of Apollo's son allowed me the chance to return from Hades. Aesculapius's powerful herbs and his medical skill, to Pluto's annoyance, restored me to life. Diana was frightened. My visible presence would add to the envy inspired by this privileged treatment, and so she concealed me behind a blanket of cloud. But then, to allow me to show my face without any danger in public, she added some years to my age and altered my features. She wondered for quite some time whether Crete or Delos would suit me best for a home. In the end, she decided on neither and settled me here. She also told me to change my name, as it might have served to remind me of horses, and said, Hippolytus now can be Virbius, twice a man. Since then I have lived in this forest as one of the minor gods, and no one knows who I am, as I'm under Diana's protection and count as one of her household. Egeria's sorrow, however, could not be relieved by stories of others' misfortunes. She laid herself down at the foot of the mountains and melted away into tears, till the goddess Diana was moved by the widow's dutiful grief and thinned her limbs into water forever. Egeria now had been changed to a cooling spring. The nymphs were impressed by this strange occurrence. Hippolytus also was no less amazed than the Tuscan plowman, who sighted the fateful lump of earth in his fields, first moving freely in air, then losing the shape of a clod to assume the form of a man, who finally opened his newfound lips to reveal the future. The natives know him as Tages, the earthborn man, and the first to teach the Etruscans the skill of predicting events to come. Romulus, too, was astonished, the time when he saw the spear he had cast one day and planted deep in the Palatine suddenly burst into leaf, no longer fixed on its point of iron, but grounded in new-grown roots. It had changed from a spear to a tree, whose pliant branches surprisingly offered some welcome shade. Cipus was just as surprised when he looked in the river and actually saw there were horns on his head. Supposing it must be illusion, he raised his fingers a number of times to his brow and found he could touch what he'd seen, so he ceased to put the blame on his eyes. At the time, he was journeying home in triumph after a victory. He halted, and, raising his arms and eyes to heaven, he cried out, Gods, whatever this omen signifies, if it be good, let it be good for my country and Romulus's people. If adverse, adverse for me alone. So he made an altar of green turf, worshipped its gods with burning incense, and poured libations. Then duly consulted the quivering entrails of sacrificed victims, to learn what they might portend. The Etruscan augurer took one look and observed the signs of a mighty crisis impending, though none too clearly at first. But after he'd lifted his sharp gaze up from the guts of the sheep to the horns of Cipus, he shouted, Hail, O king! It is you, great Cipus, you with your horns, whom fate determined shall rule this place and the fortress of Latium. Only cut short delay. Make haste to pass through the open gates. It is destiny's will. When once you have entered our city, you will be our king and wield the scepter in safety forever. Cipus at once stepped back, and grimly turning his eyes away from the walls, he exclaimed, Oh, drive such evil omens away, you gods, far away. Much better that I should pass my life in exile than reign as king on the Capitol hill. When he'd spoken these words, he immediately summoned the Senate and people. First, he concealed his horns in a wreath of triumphal laurel, then mounted a platform of earth which his valiant soldiers had built him. After he'd made the traditional prayers to the gods, he addressed his audience thus, There is one man here who shall be your king, unless you drive him out of the city. I'll not reveal that person by name, but by means of a sign. He has horns on his forehead. The augur declares, if he enters Rome, he will make you his slaves. He might, I can tell you, have forced his way through the open gates, but I withstood him, though none is closer to me than he is. Roman citizens, bar that man from your city forever, or if he deserves it, bind him fast in the heaviest chains, or else put an end to your fear by the death of a deadly tyrant. A murmur ran through the crowd, just like the boisterous east wind whistling in bush-topped pines, or the waves of the sea in the distance. Amid the confusion of babbling sounds, one cry rang over the others. Who is he? It asked, and everyone carefully examined his neighbors' foreheads to find the horns that the speaker had mentioned. Then Cipus addressed them again. "Look, here is the man you are seeking." He took the wreath from his brow, though the crowd tried hard to prevent him. And there were the two conspicuous horns surmounting his temples. The people lowered their eyes and groaned, till in puzzled reluctance they looked at the warrior's glorious head. But they wouldn't permit him to stay unhonored for long and replace the wreath on his forehead. Since Cipus was now forbidden to enter the walls of the city, the elders gave him a parcel of land as a mark of honor, large as the space that a man could enclose with the blade of his plowshare, driving his oxen throughout one day from sunrise to sunset. And horns which recalled his miraculous form were engraved on the brazen gateposts, there to preserve his memory down through the ages. Reveal to me now, O Muses, you guardian spirits of poets. You know the truth, and your memory cannot be dulled by time. How Aesculapius, son of Coronis, was brought to the island ringed by the Tiber to join the gods of Romulus's city. A terrible plague had once polluted the air of Latium. The sufferers' bodies were pallid as ghosts and foully neglected. Weary of funeral rites, the people decided that human efforts were useless and medical arts could do nothing to help. So they looked for heavenly aid and sent a mission to Delphi, Apollo's oracular shrine, which is set at the earth's very center. The envoys humbly implored the god for a health-giving answer, to help them in trouble and in their mighty city's afflictions. The temple floor and the laurel tree shook, and so did the quiver worn by Apollo himself. The listeners quaked in terror, as out of the innermost shrine these words came forth from the cauldron. "Romans, the aid which you seek from here had better be looked for nearer to home. Now search for it nearer to home. Your need is not for Apollo to lighten your woes, but the son of Apollo. Go on your way with my blessing and summon my offspring to heal you." After the thoughtful Senate received the oracle's answer, they managed to trace the city where Phoebus' son had his precinct, and sent a party by ship to the port which serves Epidaurus. As soon as the curved ship's prow was beached on the shingle, the envoys approached the council of Grecian elders and begged them to part with the god, whose presence would cure the plague destroying the people of Italy. That was the oracle's promise, which must be fulfilled. Opinion was badly divided. According to some of the elders, help should not be refused, but many believed they'd be wiser to keep the aid of the god to themselves and not to release him. The matter was still in suspense as dusk excluded the daylight. Darkness had fully enveloped the world in the shadow of earth when the god of healing appeared in a dream to one of the envoys, standing in front of the Roman's bed in the form of the statue we see in his temple, holding a countryman's staff in his left hand, stroking his flowing beard with his right. Then quietly and calmly he said, "Fear not, I shall come to your aid and forsake my images. Now take a careful look at this snake entwining my staff, and fix it well in your memory, so that you know it is I when you see it again. I shall change to its likeness, but seem to be greater, great as a god should appear when the form of his body is changed." The divine voice faded, the god went away, and so did the Romans sleep, on whose heels there followed the kindly, life-giving day. Now that the dawn had banished the fiery stars from the heavens, the elders, still undecided, came to the elegant temple of Aesculapius, and prayed that the god might show by a clear sign whether he wished to be taken to Rome or remain where he was. They had barely ended their prayer when the god, in the form of a snake with a towering golden crest, announced his advent by hissing. His statue, the altar, the doors, the marble floor, and the golden gables trembled. Then raised breast high in the heart of the temple, he stood there, gazing round on the crowd with his fire-flashing eyes. The people were stricken with fear, but the priest, whose locks were bound in the woolen headband of holiness, knew the divinity's presence. "The god is amongst us," he cried. "All hearts and tongues be auspicious, ye that are here. Most glorious deity, grant that this vision of thee be a blessing. Assist the peoples before thine altar. All who were present worshipped the god as the priest commanded, repeating the words of his prayers as he spoke them. Devout as Aeneas, the Roman visitors too showed reverent hearts and tongues. The god made clear his assent by nodding his crest, and thrice emitted a hiss from his darting tongue to confirm his approval. Then, gliding down the shimmering steps and turning his head, he looked once more at the ancient altar he now was deserting, and bade farewell to the temple and home he had known so long. From there the enormous serpent slithered along a carpet of flowers spread over the ground, and went on his way through the city, down to the port, which was fortified by a curving embankment. Here he halted, and turning round with a kindly expression, appeared to dismiss the escort of worshippers thronging behind him. Quickly he boarded and lay in the Roman ship, which felt the weight of the god and settled deeper into the water. The Romans joyfully offered a slaughtered bull on the shore, set garlands of flowers on the prow, and unfastened the mooring cables. The ship was wafted along by a gentle wind. The snake god lifted his body aloft and rested his neck on the curved prow, gazing down on the blue below. On the mildest of breezes he crossed the Ionian Sea, and 5 dawns on, he arrived off Italy. There his voyage continued, past Licinium, famed for its splendid temple of Juno, and past Scilasium. He put Iapygia behind him, avoiding Amphrisia's rocks to the left and Cyllenia's crags on the right. Then, skirting Romathium, Caulon, and Locri, he braved the narrow straits of Pelorus's headland in Sicily. Next he made for Aeolus's islands, Temes's mines, Leucosia's isle, and the gardens of sunny Paestum, where roses abound. Thence, passing the Cape of Minerva and Capri, Sorrentum's hills with their noble vineyards, he came to Stabiae, Herculaneum, Parthenopean Naples, perfect for lazy living, on to the shrine of the Sibyl at Cumae. Next to the medicinal springs of the region, Liternum's forest of mastic trees, the river Volturnus with all the sand swirling along on its bed, and the haunt of the doves, Sinuessa. On from there to unhealthy, swamp-infested Minturnae, to Formiae, once Antiphates' awful domain, Caetia, where pious Aeneas buried his old nurse Trachis, surrounded by marshes, Circe's country, and Antium's beach with its firm sand. Here the crew directed the sailing ship to the shore, as the sea had turned rough. On landing, the god unfolded his coils, and gliding along in voluminous folds with his sinuous spiral, he came to his father Apollo's temple adjoining the sands. When the spirit most close to himself had given him shelter until the sea had calmed down, the serpent left the altar of Phoebus and furrowed the sand to the ship with the track of his rustling scales. He mounted the rudder and rested his head once more on the prow. Shortly he passed by Castrum, Inuus's camp, sailed on to Lavinium's sacred town, and entered the mouth of the Tiber. Here, on the banks, he could see a crowd of commoners, matrons, elders, the virgins who watched the fires in the temple of Vesta, rushing to meet him and greet his arrival with cheers of rejoicing. The ship moved swiftly upstream. On a row of improvised altars, incense was smoking and crackling, perfuming the air on the 2 banks. Knives were dripping with blood, still warm from sacrificed victims. And now he had entered the city of Rome, the world's great capital. Raising his serpent's body aloft and supporting his neck on the top of the mast, the god looked round for a home that would suit him. He'd come to a point where the Tiber divides and its waters encircle a plot which is known as the Island. The river extends its arms in an equal embrace to either side of the land it's surrounding. Here the serpent son of Apollo abandoned the Latian pine ship and landed. Resuming his heavenly form, he brought the plague to an end and answered the prayers of the city for healing. Aesculapius came from abroad to dwell in our shrines, but Caesar is God in his native city. He showed his genius in war and in peace, but all his campaigns that ended in triumphs, all his achievements at home and his rapid promotion to glory, did less to secure his change to a constellation or comet than what was decreed by his son. Of the deeds of Julius Caesar, none can be greater than standing father to Caesar Augustus. Julius surely could boast that he conquered the islander Britons. He led a victorious fleet up the Nile with its seven-mouthed delta, and banks so rich in papyrus. He brought the Numidian rebels, Cyniphian Juba, the realm of Pontus which swells with pride in the name Mithridates, beneath the sway of the Roman people. He rode in triumphs and merited more, but how can the glory of all these exploits amount to the glory of having begotten so glorious a son, a leader with whom, at the head of our empire, the gods have showered the richest of blessings on all mankind? Yet Julius's son could not have been born from seed that was mortal, so Julius had to be made a god. When Aeneas's golden mother perceived this, and also saw that a tragic death awaited her priest at the hands of traitors sworn to his murder, her cheeks grew pale, and she said to each of the gods she encountered, "Look at the massive power of the treachery marshaled against me. Look at the dangerous plot which threatens a life that I dearly cherish, the only surviving descendant of Trojan Iulus. Must I be the only god to be racked by justified anguish? One day I receive a wound from the spear of the Greek Diomedes. Next I grieve for the walls of Troy so poorly defended. Then I must watch my son through endless wanderings, hounded, tossed on the ocean, forced to enter the ghostly kingdom, fighting his wars with Turnus, or rather with Juno's hate, if the truth be told. But why recite the trials of my family long in the past? My present alarm excludes remembrance of earlier fears. Look there, you can see them sharpening their daggers, the traitors. Stop them, I beg you. Avert this iniquity. Vesta's fires must never be quenched by the brutal death of her high priest." Such were the anxious complaints that Venus unsuccessfully aired all over Olympus. The gods were certainly moved. Although they couldn't defy the iron decrees of the fates, they still were able to give clear signs of looming disaster. Men say that the crime was foreshadowed by clashing arms in the black clouds. Trumpets and horns were awesomely blaring and braying in heaven. The sun's face also was gloomy and steeped the uneasy earth in a ghostly pallor. Shooting stars were constantly streaking across the sky, and drops of blood were discharged from the rain clouds. The face of the morning star was dimmed and bespeckled with dirty, rust-colored spots. Blood spattered the chariot bearing the moon. All over the city the Stygian owl was hooting its sinister omens. Ivory statues wept, and voices chanting dirges of doom could be heard, they say, in the sacred groves. Every sacrificed victim presented signs of bad omen. The lobe of a liver had been cut off by the priest to be found in the entrails, and so give token of mighty upheavals impending. Out in the forum, around men's houses, and close to the temples, the night was disturbed by the howling of dogs. The streets were haunted by roaming ghosts of the dead, and the city was shaken by tremors. But warnings from heaven were powerless to halt the plot or forestall what fate had decreed. The conspirators entered the hall of the Senate, naked swords in their hands. No other building in Rome but that sacred place would serve for their crime, for the infamous murder. That was the moment when Venus beat her breast with both of her hands and attempted to hide Aeneas's descendant in cloud, as once she had stolen Paris away from his foe Menelaus, and helped Aeneas himself to escape Diomedes' sword. Then Jupiter said to her, "Daughter, must you be the only goddess to fight invincible fate? You may go yourself to the hall of the Sisters Three, and there you will visit the records of fortune, a massive structure of tablets inscribed in brass and the solidest iron. These tablets fear no clashing of clouds, nor the thunderbolt's wrath, nor destruction however it come. They are safe and abiding. There you will find your family's destinies cast in enduring adamant. I myself have perused and noted their contents. Pay heed to the truth. You must not be left in the dark any longer. The man for whom you are laboring, Venus, has come to the end of his time. The years he has owed to the earth are duly completed. Now he will rise to the sky as a god and be worshipped in temples. You will ensure it, you with the son who is heir to his name, and will shoulder the lonely burden of state. With us for his allies in war, this bravest of men shall avenge the death of his father. He shall be lord of the day when beleaguered Mutina is captured and sues for peace. His might shall be felt on Pharsalus's plain when it's drenched with blood for a second time on the field of Philippi. Sextus Pompeius shall suffer defeat in Sicilian waters. A Roman general's Egyptian mistress, who trusted the marriage torch to her cost, shall fall, and her threat will be given the lie, that Rome's strong Capitol Hill should bow to her Isle of Canopus. But why should I list barbarian lands and the nations that lie to the east and the west? Where men can live and be fed by the soil, that land shall be his. The sea shall follow and know him as master. When peace has come to the earth, he will turn his mind to the duties and rights of his people at home. Most just as a giver of laws, he will guide men's ways by his own example. His eye for the future, for all his descendants to come, will lead him to order the holy Livia's son to adopt his name with the cares of his office. Only when he has come to Pylian Nestor's years shall he rise to our home in the heavens and join the star of his kinsman. Meanwhile, you must rescue his father's soul from his cut-ridden body and make him a comet, that deified Julius's image may always gaze on my Capitol Hill from the height of his shrine in the Forum. Scarcely had Jupiter ended his speech when life-giving Venus set herself down in the heart of the Senate, though no one could see her, and caught the soul of her Caesar up as it passed from his body. She did not allow its component atoms to be dispersed into air, but carried it straight as it was to the stars in the heavens. During her journey, she felt it glowing and catching fire, so she let it escape from out of her bosom and fly right upwards. Higher far than the moon it soared, displaying a sweeping trail of flame in its wake, till it finally took the form of a gleaming star. Now Julius watches his son's achievements and proudly admits they surpass his own. Though Augustus will never let it be said that his deeds are greater than those of his father, speech that is free and unfettered in spite of the emperor's wishes declares him supreme, and ventures only in this to oppose him. Atreus gives way to his son Agamemnon's title to glory, Aegeus to Theseus's greatness, and Peleus to godlike Achilles. Lastly, to take an example which matches the case of our own Caesars, Saturn is likewise lower than Jupiter. Jupiter governs the heavenly heights and all the realms of the three-formed universe. Earth is under Augustus, and each is ruler and father. I call on you, gods who attended Aeneas through fire and sword, and compelled them to yield. You native Italian gods and Quirinus, who founded our city. On Mars, who fathered unconquered Quirinus. Vesta, whom Caesar reveres amongst the gods of his household. Apollo, an honored neighbor of Caesar, as surely as Vesta. Jupiter, throned in his temple, surmounting the heights of Tarpeia, and all of the other gods whom a righteous poet may worship. Slow to dawn be that day, long after my time, when Augustus leaves the world that he rules and rises up to the heavens. So may he lend a favoring ear to our prayers from his new home. Now I have finished my work, which nothing can ever destroy. Not Jupiter's wrath, nor fire or sword, nor devouring time. That day, which has power over nothing except this body of mine, may come when it will and end the uncertain span of my life. But the finer part of myself shall sweep me into eternity, higher than all the stars. My name shall be never forgotten. Wherever the might of Rome extends in the land she has conquered, the people shall read and recite my words. Throughout all ages, if poets have vision to prophesy truth, I shall live in my fame.